Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we're very fortunate to have Simone Albert, who'll be presenting on understanding the emotional phases of allergies. Simone is a wellbeing expert, a counsellor, and a nurse whose passion is to support families. She specialises in helping and guiding parents, children, and adolescents living with a chronic condition, in particular allergies, have a more fulfilled life. So Simone has close to 30 years of professional work in hospitals, clinics, and private practice, including over 14 years of personal experience as a family living with the chronic condition of allergies. Hi, Simone. Great to have you here today.
Hi, Mari. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about your journey with your family, Simone, and what you've gone through.
Well, as you mentioned, our journey started about 14, 15 years ago now, when we had no family history or any indications that we would be a part of this world. But my son was transitioned from breast milk to formula milk. And when I gave him some formula, he had a severe anaphylactic reaction.
Wow. And do you remember that day vividly now, every aspect of it?
I actually remember it like it was yesterday, believe it or not. I can feel what the weather was like. I remember distinctly what had happened. I went through a long period where I just blocked it very much from my mind, but I can remember it very clearly.
So you were overseas at the time, is that correct?
Yes, I was in Switzerland living.
And were you able to get the support you needed straight away, or did you have to sit there and watch your son have his first anaphylactic reaction, not knowing really what was going on?
It was a long time ago, so it was 15 years ago. When it happened, I was, I suppose, fortunate enough to know exactly what was happening because of my background and training. So as a nurse, I had always been trained in any emergency situation, and anaphylaxis is one of those. So I did know what was happening, but I didn't have any of the emergency medication with me. We had newly moved to Switzerland. Unfortunately, I didn't even know the emergency number. Sadly, I learned that pretty quickly, that every place I went to, that was the first thing I did, was learnt the emergency number. We were very fortunate to have a clinic down the road, literally probably 150 metres down the road, and that's probably what saved our son at the time.
Wow. I have a daughter with a severe nut allergy, and we were overseas. And I still live the trauma of what happened. She didn't have a full anaphylactic reaction, but she certainly responded to something that she'd eaten, and we didn't have our medication on us. It was back at the hotel, and that was about 7 years ago, and I still relive that day and that fear, trying to find antihistamines in Tokyo and needing the support there, and we really had very little. So you would have learned very quickly that you had to be almost self-sufficient and always on top of a situation with your son that has got such a chronic condition with his allergies.
Yeah, we learned very quickly that to circumventilate our anxiety and our fears and our overwhelms, that we were prepared. We just learnt that very quickly, that we had to be prepared to reduce our anxiety. And so we made sure that we always had their life saving medication with him. We always carried our emergency medication, all the extra stuff that comes with us, just to help us, because we were never sure when this would happen again. So we had to reduce our anxiety by being prepared, and that's how we manage that part. And we learned from our experiences. That's something else that we took away from that any time that something happened, and I'm sure you were the same, that if we travel, that we now know the emergency numbers of those places. We don't eat out without the medication. We're understanding of what we have to do and what the signs and symptoms are. So that helps us manage the situation and feel comfortable in that situation.
So one thing that's terrific is you're a counsellor and you focus on mental health and managing allergies. So I imagine that's the mental health of the parents who's caring for the child with the allergy. And are you also looking after the mental health of children with the chronic conditions?
So, as you mentioned, my main focus is on people living with this chronic condition, allergies, or any chronic condition, and transitioning maybe from a diagnosis that's new to them. What that normally comes with is anxiety, overwhelm, unsure of your future. So I do work with a lot of parents if they've got a young child that has been newly diagnosed and they're living with anxiety perhaps, or overwhelm, and just not knowing how to transition through that from a mental health perspective. I also do work with a lot of children, mainly if they've got, if they're presenting with anxiety or overwhelmed, or something's happened to traumatize them, they've had an anaphylactic reaction and they haven't recovered from that, working through that and supporting them through that and healing from that and moving forward to their pre-anaphylactic reaction mental state. So I do work with both. It just depends on the situation.
Sure. So being a carer to someone who has got a chronic condition, an allergy, can be incredibly daunting when you first get the diagnosis. And then I understand that you've explored the various phases that you go through emotionally on that journey. Can you talk about those phases?
Yeah, so when I lived this whole new journey, and when I started counselling, I saw a pattern arising, and I then decided to write a book, and I realised to fit into the book it was really good to set them out in phases. And I really saw, after counselling so many people and living the experience, that there were different phases throughout the journey. So I name them, and it's just something that I've come up with. That's so the first phase is situation, when you're going through maybe what is happening in your child or what's happening in yourself. And then there's shock, which is the trauma of a diagnosis, searching, finding a new way. And this causes a lot of emotional turmoil and perhaps some grieving, a lot of transition in our mind. And then there's survival, which is the acceptance period in an allergy family. Superpower, when we build our knowledge and we tap into all those resources to find out what more information we can gain to be empowered by this new diagnosis, and we can, take hold of it and be the boss of how we're going to journey forward from that. And then we have strength. We come to a pause where our children are getting a little bit older and they're more independent, and we've got some tools and strategies and boundaries to allow us to calm our mind, to sit into this new diagnosis. And then we continue to learn, and we soar at the end. We feel very empowered that we've got this. We've got a few little things that we still need to work with. Our anxiety might increase at different periods throughout that, but towards the end, we feel very empowered to be able to soar and live this life to the fullest.
And I know in your book you do explore those various phases. It's a fantastic guide. I would have loved to have had that on our journey. My daughter's now 15, and I still have your book next to my bed because there's always something that occurs when you have a child who has a severe allergy. So I found it a great support so far, even though I've lived sort of 14 years with my child, and this 15 she is now with her allergy. So often what has happened with our situation, there's confusion between an anxiety attack and an anaphylactic reaction. And that's really difficult from a non-medico, such as someone like myself, that you're watching this reaction that looks to be an anaphylactic one, the shortness of breath. My daughter says she has a tingly mouth. her throat's closing. And so I'm going into this response that, oh, she's having an anaphylactic reaction. And then I'm going, is it, or is it an anxiety attack? Because she's fearful that she might have an anaphylactic response. I'm sure this must happen with other mums and dads who've got children with who are anaphylactic. What support would you offer myself and others like me when that occurs?
Oh, you've raised a really good point, and just to let you know that this is a normal response to an abnormal situation. So what happens, just understanding that there are very big similarities between increased anxiety, panic attack, and anaphylaxis is very important. Body mapping, which you've explained, your daughter's done extremely well. Getting to know her body and understanding what the subtle differences are. Like that, and it's the physiological changes that happen are very real. They happen as a fight or flight response when we're confronted with fear and protecting ourselves. So the difficulty swallowing, the shortness of breath, the sweaty palms, the sweating, even the stomach ache, sometimes even vomiting in severe anxiety is a case. Happens, and this is very similar to this, anaphylaxis. So it's really important to body map, to understand our body, and then to question our thoughts. So in fight or flight, which is an evolutional process that we have in our mind, our amygdala goes into it's a doer, and it just goes into action to protect ourselves. So that's what it's doing. So if we can quieten that and bring ourselves to the present moment through deep breathing exercises, it's very important to bring ourselves back to the present moment. There's also grounding exercises. There's a few different exercises that I train people to do that are evidence-based to do in calm periods, to then be able to use in times of panic. So if we learn those exercises in calm times, then we can use them in times when our anxiety rises. So they're practice. So our brain is an organ, but it's a bit like a muscle. The more that we train it, the more that we exercise it, it's the muscle memory that happens, and then we can action it at that time. For that time in your daughter, we want to bring her back to the present moment. I want you to come back to the present moment. Through doing those breathing exercises, you're able to bring your mind back to the present moment and then start questioning those thoughts. Is it real reason to have a reaction? Have I done something recent? No. So really there's no reason for me to have an anaphylactic if it's food that I'm allergic to. If I've just eaten, then I might question that thought and say, did I prepare that food? Did I read all the ingredients? It's something I always, and start questioning those thoughts. And if we're able to calm the mind, bring it back to the present moment, question those thoughts. Is it real, unreal? Is it rational, irrational? And start like that. If the reaction progresses and we have swelling and redness and hives and it keeps on getting worse and worse, shortness of breath, of course we go for our emergency medication. But just stopping and pausing and trying to calm ourselves are very evidence-based tools. Yeah, so that's really important to keep on practicing those exercises in calm times. And if the brain knows to use them then in times of fear or anxiety or heightened anxiety, the other thing we can use is a scale, 0 to 10. With 0 being our calmest space. Most allergy children and parents sit at a 2 or 3 in calm times. So just knowing where you sit on the scale, and then as that builds up with something that's triggering your anxiety or something that's causing you fear, if it gets up to around a 5 or a 6, start using those exercises before it gets too high, an 8 or a 9, where you'll have those physiological symptoms in your body that can confuse you between whether it's anxiety or anaphylaxis. So if you can keep on using that scale, 0 to 10, find out where you sit in calm, if it's around a 2 or a 3. And then if you see your anxiety moving up to a 5 or a 6, then you can use the breathing strategies, the calming tools that we build, and then hopefully you don't get to a physiological stage of panic where you start feeling those physical symptoms that represent an anaphylactic reaction. So there's some tips that hopefully can be helpful.
So with I want my children to have a wonderful relationship with food. I want them to love food. I want them to explore all different food types. When you've got a child that's allergic to not just one food type, say nuts, but also shellfish and maybe soy, and how do you develop that healthier relationship? What tips can you give for us as mums to develop that healthy relationship with food, even though your child can be allergic to so many food types?
Yeah, I hear you. We have dairy, wheat, egg, peanut, shellfish, all of those. So starting early is my biggest advice to mums. If you're, or dads, families, if you're having difficulties remaining calm around food, then seek professional mental health for yourself first. So then, because we know that anxiety and overwhelm are very contagious. So if you're presenting outwardly with this anxiety, then your child will feel it. Actually, all our emotions are very contagious to our children. If they're upset and having a tantrum, and we get upset, then just everything escalates. So starting off very young and managing our own anxiety around food will then not cause a contagious reaction to have our children balk at that food. Setting boundaries around what we feel comfortable as parents with. If that means not eating out as much for that present moment when they're younger, and creating a healthy eating plan at home with the foods that you feel safe with, then that's good. There's a lot of advice now, working with a nutritionist, working with a dietitian to work out what the foods that you can eat and still having lots of fun with food, enjoying the food at home, creating a restaurant atmosphere at home, role playing, and introducing foods that way when they're young. Not really separating foods, not really, educating them about the foods they can't eat, but not sticking to that point, always making the experience positive. That's a really good starting point.
So with taking out particularly young children to restaurants, what tips would you have to the parents to have an enjoyable experience? I mean, obviously, you want to have the EpiPen handy, you must take the antihistamines with you. But what tips would you give to mums like myself with a young child? Before you go to a restaurant, should I be checking the menu? How do I make sure that I can have a really good time with my family and not be anxious?
Yeah, that's a good question. From a mental health perspective, we always advise to do things that make you feel comfortable with. So, stepping out of that comfort zone a little bit, but having boundaries around that. So what one boundary could be is ringing a restaurant ahead of time, asking if they're able to cater for your child's allergens or your own allergens, asking them when would the best time to come in and perhaps have a chat to them about what things on the menu would be okay. This is reducing our anxiety. If we go into a restaurant unprepared and we don't know that restaurant, let's say on a holiday, that's okay too, as long as we're open to them. And if they're able to service us, that's okay. If they're not, then that's okay too. Find a restaurant that's able to serve you comfortably, that they feel able to provide for you. So always disclosing your allergens is number one, first and foremost. Being open about that. We always order our child's food last, So everyone else on the table will order their food first, and then we will explain that we've run up earlier and we've spoken to the manager. They've said they've been able to cater for us. We also use chef cards to reduce our anxiety because there's a lot of trust involved. I have to trust that the waitress is going to tell the chef the right thing. I have to trust that the chef's going to remember all of that, even though they've got a restaurant full. Going sometimes at the start of a serving session, sometimes they have different time slots, can help. With the chef's card, you give the waitress that card. The chef, it's a visual for the chef. The chef puts that on the allergy plate. It's another reminder for the chef. Then when they bring it back to the table, you have the conversation again. So really open communication. Some people don't like confrontation, but Allergies is very much about being open and honest about your condition and being prepared to have those honest, lengthy conversations. So if you're tired or exhausted or rushing or not prepared, it's really best not to enter those situations. Sometimes kids prefer to take their own food, and that's okay too. That's their prerogative, and it might be and more enjoyable for your child, and it might be a more enjoyable experience for the parent. So it's really individual.
So talk about the chef card more. Is this something that you've made up yourself? Is there a website that you go and download, card size diagrams for the chef to show allergic to nuts or fish? Or tell us about those chef cards.
Yeah, there's a few different, when we were first started this journey, there wasn't anything around, but there's quite a few now. So if you just Google chef cards, allergy chef cards, there's quite a few different companies that make them now. You can order them. Some are reusable. We laminate ours. So, always when it's on a plate, it can get dirty and things like that. Some are just paper and you rip them up and throw them out later. And they have the allergens on there and you just cross them out or tick them off. So it's a visual reminder to everyone involved, because sometimes, and it just reminds a chef to look further that this is serious, it's a life-threatening allergy and it's real.
Oh, no, that's a great tip. And what about with a child, perhaps 9, 10 plus, who is struggling to accept the reality that they have got a chronic condition which is life-threatening? What sort of communication would you suggest that mums and dads should be having with a child that's old enough to understand? We're not talking a toddler or an infant. So it's really a 10 plus moving into teenage years. What sort of communication can mum and dad have to help their child?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because if they've been living with allergies all their life, it's probably been a big part of their life through their aging transition. Sometimes they don't want to have a part of it anymore, and sometimes it causes more fear. My would always be to go to their allergist and have that conversation with their allergist, get the medical professional advice from them. Sometimes when a child hears information from a third person, it can be heard differently and taken more seriously. But they should be practicing that in school, how to look after themselves throughout their life. So role playing as they're younger, using books as educational tools to understand the severity of their allergies but not be scared of those, increasing their knowledge about what it means without placing fear into their life is very important. Just revisiting with their allergist would be a really good port of call at that stage, I think, to hear it from a medical point of view.
So I've been hearing lately, which really concerned me, that there's an EpiPen apathy. So teenagers, more so girls, who are going out, so say going out to a party with a group of friends, and they don't want to take their EpiPen because they want a small bag, they want to take a small bag, and these EpiPens are bulky. So, this is a life-threatening issue. I can imagine the mums and dads are saying, for goodness sake, you've got to take your EpiPen, and that fear that you can't watch over your child anymore day and night. What would you say to a mum and dad with a teenager, even in their 20s that are saying that they're not taking their EpiPen, they'll be fine, they just won't eat.
Yep. The older they get, the more honest the conversations we can have with our children. We don't want to place fear into their lives, but it's important to have that honest conversation with them to make it real to them. There's lots of that. My advice is always, if there's young mums on here, to have the connection with their EpiPen right from a young age. So it becomes a normal habit that they do. They just grab it and they carry it all the time. So that's the best advice, to make sure that it happens when they're young, and then that's just a part of their lives. Wherever they are, they'll take it. Working with the teenager is also a really good thing. How can we make it better for you? How can we make it easier for you? What can we do to make it easier for you to be okay with carrying your EpiPen? If you're going to a party, should we go and take one to the party place beforehand? Should we offer it to the family that are having the party? Should they have it there on hand if you don't want to carry it as a part of your attire? We do want you to bring it home afterwards. We do want them to carry it really pretty much all the time. So maybe it's about buying a new handbag with your daughter or son, not son, but your daughter, and going out and having that positive experience together. Whatever I feel bringing them on board and having the honest conversation with them about how it's important. It can save lives. It can save your life. You know, we know that, like flying in an aeroplane, we hopefully never need to use the emergency drill information that we get told, but we need to understand why, and we need to know what to do. And that's a part of their plan. The emergency drill is to have an EpiPen with them at all times, especially when they're going out. How can we help you to make it easier for you to be able to carry that? I know boys have slip pockets sewn into their outfit or into their shirt or things like that. It's really important to work with them, I think, to see what you can do to make it easier for them to be comfortable with carrying it.
Okay. Now, there's lots of questions coming through, Simone. Are you happy to answer some of the questions from our audience today?
Yeah, sure. I'll try my best. Yep.
Okay, so we've got one here. What strategies might you suggest for a diagnosed child or young person in dealing with other kids who might bully them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It happens more often than we would like for it to happen. The reason we understand now that the reason that this bullying happens, just doesn't matter if you have allergies or not, is it stems from the actual person bullying. So self-esteem strategies, self-confidence strategies for the person being bullied is really good. Giving them the confidence to stand up for themselves. Explaining to them it has nothing to do with them. It's about the person bullying. Explaining that they've done nothing wrong. Explaining that they're just finding a weakness anywhere to pick on someone, and wanting to see a reaction. Educating your child about who a bully is, what a bully is, what it means to be a bully, and then building their self-confidence and their self-esteem up, to give them tools to have a voice to express themselves, to have confidence in themselves, to turn their backs on those people. Because we know now that if we don't give the bully fuel, then quite often they'll move on to someone else. We don't want them to move on to someone else, and we hope that they don't. But in protection for your own child, giving them a voice, giving them the communication to be able to speak up for themselves, working on their self-esteem and their self-confidence quite often helps in those situations. But they're very difficult situations. Work with your school, work with the teachers, and approach it that way.
Thanks, Simone. That's some good tips there. Just in regards to school, we've got an interesting situation here with, particularly in Victoria, that schools have been closed and we're not quite sure how long they're going to be closed for. We're hoping that as we move into next term. But I would imagine with mums who've got children starting school next year who have got severe allergies, the normal process would be around sort of September, October, they'd be heading up to the new school, having conversations with the teachers and the principal, so there's an understanding of their child that's coming into the school community. How would you help mums and dads that are incredibly frustrated because they're not given the opportunity whilst the schools are closed to get up there and to make sure their child will have all the support they need when they start in February next year?
Yeah, it's all about reducing that anxiety, especially coming into the summer, because that's a long, 8 weeks of not knowing what's going to happen next year. So we really want to preempt that and reduce the anxiety now. I would say continue the communication. Pick up the phone instead. Ask those questions. They will be open to it. Email. We're very fortunate in Victoria, well, not in the times of today, but with living with allergies in schools, there's a lot of you had Patricia Ilhan on yesterday, and they brought a lot of legislation into Victoria about what actually has to happen. So there's a lot of protocols that have to be followed. So the schools are very open to communication about it, understanding of the anxiety that comes with it. They might have protocols. So just to even cite some of those protocols might reduce your anxiety. Also working on an individualized plan. Risk management assessments will happen. They will all happen. Just starting the ball rolling to build up your confidence that they know that your child's coming, that they understand what the situation is for your child, then that will highlight to them and to you that they're starting the process of understanding that we can still do it, reframe it, put it on, get on the phone instead of walking into the school. Sometimes that might even be better. It may not be as confrontational for you in the beginning until you get to know these people and build that trust with them. Emails are really good because you can visualize what they're writing to you. It's there in print. You can always go back to it later, reread it, process it, but definitely start the ball rolling now.
Thank you. There's some good tips there. Now, Amanda has written in saying, can stress affect or heighten your allergies? So stress that's been experienced.
So that's a medical question. That's one for your allergist, your immunologist. Okay. But we do know stress can cause physiological changes in your body for anyone. Doesn't have to be even allergies. So it's always best to try and monitor our stress, reduce our stress, release it in any way, whether it's exercise, sleep, good nutrition, release it some way and manage our stress. It's always good for our health because it does manifest physiologically in our body. But in particular to allergies, that would be a question for your allergist.
Thank you. We've got another question here from Susan, who's a mum. Their child is allergic to nuts, in particular walnuts, and she's saying, I feel guilty when I'm sitting around having a beautiful cake that my child can't eat. What would you say to Susan about that sense of guilt that everyone around the table is going, yum, this tastes great, and your child is sitting there just watching, going, I'd love to have that. So how does mum not feel guilty?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's always tricky. And it's very individual. I first want to say that mum guilt is very real for all mums in different situations. How it presents is that's one example of mum guilt in your particular situation. So know that a lot of mums go through mum guilt. It's a real thing. We have to work hard at not having the mum guilt. So if you have mum guilt anyway, this amplifies mum guilt. I hear you. I understand what you're saying. These are choices you can make for yourself in how you want to approach that. We always have some very amazing treat for our child in those situations, a treat that they've normally chosen themselves. So that gives them control over the situation. They've chosen it themselves. It gives them, gives them power to feel included. I like to also give them choice. So, we're going to a party. They're probably going to have a cake there. What's your favorite cake? Is it A, B, C, or D? So they feel that they're being included, they're getting some choice, and they're having some control over the situation. If they don't feel left out, then your mum guilt will be reduced. And that's a really good tip for empowering them, giving them choice, having them included in the situation. And that's our biggest aim always as mums. I feel that we just want them to feel included, a part of it. And that's how we can do it. There's a bit of forward planning there, and we learn. Sometimes maybe if you've gone to the party once and this has happened and it's really hurt your heart, then next time you can learn from that experience and say, well, next time I might take a treat for myself and my child, and we both might eat those, or we might bring something that everyone can share, and that will be the thing that they chose. Yeah, there's a few different things that you can do in that space to help you reduce your mum guilt. But I hear you. It happens a lot, but we live with mum guilt generally in our society.
Thanks, Simone. Anna has written in saying or asking what support is there for families with severe allergies, and I understand what Anna is asking as well. I mean, it can be a very lonely journey having a child with a severe allergy. So what supports are there for families?
I wonder, so that can mean a few different things. So the supports are obviously your allergist and your immunologist. There's nutritionists and dietitians. There's psychology, mental health professionals, counsellors, and then there's the beautiful Free From an Allergy show where you're learning, you're feeling part of a community. There's different pages. We're lucky now with social media that we're in touch with the whole world. So we have access to the whole world now. It's also good to choose those pages wisely and see what helps you. Always choose what makes you feel better and not worse. So if it comes from a place of fear, it's unnecessary. If it's making you feel worse, then tap out of that. You have the choice to move away from that. So anytime that you're feeling uncomfortable, remove yourself from that situation. There are support groups in different states. Finding your tribe, finding what works for you and what makes you feel comfortable, that you're able to voice your what you're going through safely and openly and honestly, and what makes you feel good after that. It's tricky. I get it. But you're not alone. There's a lot of us traveling this journey, and just knowing that you're not alone, reaching out to those people. I have some different groups. I have a group of girlfriends that was from prior to having children. So I won't even say allergies. I'll just say I have, a couple of girlfriends, a few I select, and have those, for when I just want to let my hair down. And then I have some friends that I have that are totally related to allergies, that totally get what I'm going through and totally understand what I'm doing, what I'm saying. They get it and they hear me. Find those people and connect with them.
Thanks, Simone. The questions are coming in thick and fast, and we've only got a short time left. But can I, if I'm just looking over to the right, because these questions are coming through on this other computer. This person has said that they've recently been diagnosed as an adult with allergies to many different foods. Are there tips you can provide for someone who might be in my situation and find it emotionally and mentally difficult to attend social gatherings or hang out with friends because of it? So recently diagnosed as an adult.
Yep. So first and foremost, to have a really good medical team on your side to gain that really crucial medical advice and education. Then we feel more empowered to how far we can stretch our boundaries. It's okay for you to start off small and make that safe comfort zone. I talk about that in my book, the safety comfort zone, where you feel okay. It's okay to start off small, have a small group of friends that you can trust and feel comfortable with, and then expand that. Know that you can change the goalpost at any time. Don't be stuck in that situation. Build up experiences, positive experiences where you feel safe and comfortable. Work with a mental health professional would be my biggest advice at this stage. The earlier we get onto how we can support ourselves with our mental health, the easier the journey is. If we are working from a place of being proactive rather than reactive, the journey is a lot smoother and faster. If we're working from a crisis or a trauma point, there's a lot we can do as well, but it is a longer journey. So that's my biggest advice in a short snippet.
Thank you, Simone. We've got a Facebook community with those with food intolerances, and we've asked them what their intolerance has taught them. And it was really interesting, the response. What happens if you can't find a positive with your allergy or intolerance? What would you say to those in the community that's saying, well, what could be positive about having an allergy like this?
Yeah. So in the counselling world, we call that unpacking, and we would unpack that further, and we would dig deeper, and we would work around that. There is always, no matter how hard the days are, and we've learned this a lot through the COVID experience here in Victoria in hard lockdown, there's always a positive experience or feeling or something to be grateful for in the day that we've had, whatever it is. So it would be unpacking that further to find something. I ask that question quite a lot as well, and we always seem to find something, even if it's taught me to understand food in a deeper context, or it's taught me how to monitor how healthy I am, or I would encourage unpacking that further. And what I mean by unpacking that is looking into that a little bit more deeply, and reflecting on that.
So with our audience, what are 3 pieces of wisdom that you can give our audience that you live by?
Oh, my biggest one is be prepared, don't be scared. So always, be prepared, carry your EpiPen, know that you're in control, you've got the stuff if you need it. Adrenaline is a magic. We're so fortunate to have such a magical medication that changes things so quickly, yet it's very safe for the body. So even if let's say that you gave it, but you're unsure whether you should give it, it's not hurting your body. You're best to take it rather than not take it, give it rather than not give it. So always being prepared, don't be scared, manage the situation to the best that you can. The second one would be through talking we grow. So be open to talking, to be open to learning, push through those stressful situations through, maybe talking to one other person or having a close friend that you can talk to. I know sometimes when we're so emotionally, at the moment I'm working with a lot of people in Victoria, not necessarily with allergies, but just not feeling they've got the energy to talk about how they feel. And I always say that's okay. You don't have to explain yourself. It's emotionally exhausting having to explain yourself over and over again, but always keep that open line of communication with one person. Through talking we grow, we learn, and also, continue the educational journey about allergies and intolerances, even when you feel you know it all. Continue to learn. We're always learning, and then that will empower us further.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simone. Look, we are running out of time. It's been a great presentation today. As I said, I have your book and I have read it from cover to cover, and it's really useful to me. I still use it now. The way you've stepped through each of the phases to give you greater understanding, and I think you said and knowledge, because that knowledge is power. And what I think is really rare about you, if I can say, here you are with a counsellor that really understands what it's like to have a chronic condition within your family, and you've just given us some wonderful tips and ways that can help us in our daily life with our family. I know your website. You've got what's your website again, Simone? Because I'm sure a lot of people would like to have a look at that.
foodallergycounselling.com.
foodallergycounselling.com, and your book is Beyond the Allergy Diagnosis. Here it is.
Yeah.
And it's a guide to understanding and navigating the emotional and physiological phases of allergies. So thank you, Simone. We have got many more questions, but we haven't got time to answer them today. It's been great to have you, and we really appreciate that you've given up your precious time on a Saturday to join us here at our lives.
Congratulations on all you're doing to help our community, and thank you for having me today.